Hello and welcome to the 4th episode of Dissecting Dandy, where I'll continue discussing how I use the tasks I derive from my goals to design parts of Dandy in further detail. Last episode I talked a lot about Dandy. I talked about my goals with the game and identified the things Dandy had to address to accomplish those goals. With a list of specific tasks, I now have the foundation that will drive each decision of the design process as our team develops this game. For a small portion of that episode, I defined some tropes of the horizontal shooter, but didn't explain why I was using the archetype so closely, and why each individual part works for the game we're making. That's an entire other episode for the future, but I want to point out that I put a lot of thought into what experience those individual mechanics create for a player. The genre is irrelevant. Understanding the designs that came before us thoroughly is extremely important if we're going to use them deliberately as tools of expression. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, we just have to know why it works. I chose to remake the Flash version of Dandy not only because the visual narrative resonated with me, but because the horizontal shooter genre lent itself to an experience I wanted to create. Let's look at a couple of the tasks I've set out to accomplish with Dandy. I want player input to matter, and I want the enemies to care about the player's input in a meaningful way. Strangely enough, this problem sorts itself out. What if I make the player's input matter by making the enemies care about it? Doesn't that give it huge significance to the player? If that doesn't make any sense, let's look at this little guy. This is an idling. He's an enemy in Dandy. This enemy cares deeply about one thing. This idling cares about what Dandy is doing, but more specifically he cares about what Dandy isn't doing. You see, idling only shoots when Dandy stops moving. Why does this matter? Well, first let's try and define something. Remember the verbs of agency? The player has the control to make Dandy move or shoot. The player using his agency results in something I never really considered important. Player states. These are specific states of action the player can be in as they perform the verbs of agency. If the player can move up and down, this means the states the player can be in are moving up, moving down, or not moving at all. There can also be more specifications depending on the rules of your game. Let's say, for example, the game added rules about touching the top edges of the screen. That introduces colliding with the edges as well as moving toward and away from the edges as possible player states. You can see how this list would grow substantially as you add more and more rules to your game, and that's just moving. Defining as many of these as I could was an astronomical advantage. I now have a huge source of quantifiable, easily expanded player states. And why does this matter? Because of this guy. This guy cares. He cares about the player state. He gives meaning to what you're doing. Without context, moving or standing still in Dandy doesn't matter. It carries little to no consequence. Idling reflects what the player is doing. What you do matters to him. Idling represents my first discovery in the archaeological dig for Dandy. In the next episode, I'll talk about the second.